everyone's back. Yeah.
Okay, well, good evening. This is an interesting chapter, a guest called Fire. And she starts to just explain a little bit. There was a great fire at the Tassajara Monastery in the Los Padres National Forest. I was at that monastery many years ago. Anyway, I remember hearing about this back in 2008, and there was an article, I don't remember a whole lot about it, called The Fire Monks. The monks stayed in the Zendo, or not in the Zendo, they stayed on the grounds, and somehow they survived the fire. Actually, there was an earlier edition of The Fire Monks, and I was there in the summer of 1977. There was the marble cone fire burned 100,000 acres in that same forest. And this was also at Tassajara. It was a long, long time ago, and I thought about today. Gary and Jane had only been married 10 years then. So. Anyway, that was kind of interesting too. And, you know, just remembering I was very young, and, you know, just the force of nature there, this fire was coming, and we decided to stay, and there was a process by which you could do these backfires. We communicated with the National Forest Service, and there was one of the students had been a fire official, and we stayed and we burned away certain areas around the grounds so that when the fire approached, it would have nothing to burn. And we banked on that happening. Of course, we had our cars ready, and the road out fire wasn't approaching from there. So we could have fled if we had to, but we stayed and we saved the grounds. And it was an interesting, very memorable time. She mentions in the chapter here this undeniable visitor that only wanted to pass through, introducing the subject of impermanence, that, you know, everything is changing faster than we can comprehend in our life. And, you know, when you think of fire, I've always thought of fire as kind of the most painful possible experience that I would want to avoid, being burned alive. But it's, you know, the heat element and the passion of our life, the light of our life force, that which lights us up, you know, lights up our experience. And Catherine mentions here, what I ask, has the fire taught you? What during these past weeks have you discovered in the blaze of your own being that is beyond all displacement, beyond all destruction, and what even now are you willing to lose in the conflagration of the present moment? So over the years of my life, I've kind of begun to really accept the fact that we're going to lose everything at some point. In fact, you know, we studied Maizumi Roshi some months ago, maybe a year ago, where he taught us that impermanence means that we're living and dying maybe hundreds of thousands of times every day, every hour, and that we are not a continuous self, but all of our experience is just flashing by us. And Catherine mentions here, she says, hold nothing back out of the mistaken notion that something, anything, must be or can be saved. And she remembers a talk by Kwang Roshi, the abbot of Sonoma Mountain Center, entitled Active Participation in Loss. Accepting things as they are is a loss. Being in the moment is a loss. What are we losing? Our self-centeredness, our self-clinging, our ideas, our conditioning. We are also losing ourselves to the sound of the crickets, the sound and feeling of the zendo as we sit. And when we know how to do this, to really lose, then we'll know how to really be alive. And so Kwang Roshi also said that Zen is the aliveness we bring to each moment. And that we practice not to limit the free expression of this life force. The life force that we are is the means by which we know our experience, and it's the means by which we know our self. We're discovering that there's no gap there. And she also mentions that, it's helpful to us when we're in situations where there are no alternatives, where we really have to face what is, face that we are the full conditioning, causes and conditions of our situation. So how do we give up these attachments, she asked, to our preferences, assumptions, our habits? My experience with Catherine's teacher, Reb, and my teacher also, practice the paramitas with them. Bring generosity and patience, being careful, concentrating, be responsible, the ability to offer the appropriate response, to the ability to respond. We're learning the ability to respond from the heart of that meditation of not grasping, not holding on. And that in itself is the offering of all of our experience. As Catherine says, give it all to the flames, offer it all. And Reb's teaching also, if you may remember, if you were here then, is that bodhisattvas learn to give away everything, give away the joy, and we learn to give away the suffering, offer it, offer the flames for the benefit of all beings, because we learning to deeply realize that we don't do anything by ourselves, but together with all beings. And when we learn to give it all away, we can also learn to give away that sense of being a separate self at the same time. So we're learning to receive and trust the transformative power of our essential being, our Buddha nature, that unconditionally welcomes all of our resistance to what is. And this is Buddha's great compassion, this offering, this unconditionally welcoming. And there's a saying, that Kwang Roshi also mentions, that you can never step in the same river twice. But we tend to believe that we can, because we want to try and solidify our world, our life, so we feel secure. But there is no security in grasping that which can't be grasped, and which is impermanent, always just flashing by. So I wanted to read something else that Kwang Roshi said about this. He says, actually, when talking about the saying, you can never step in the same river twice, the whole river is moving, and the entire environment, both river and shore, is changing as well. And also our inner and outer conditions are changing. Even our sense organs, the way that we perceive the world, are just as impermanent, flashing by, always changing. But the truth of impermanence, he says, is stronger than our mind fabrications can ever be. And as a result, there's lots of suffering that will appear when we ignore this clear fact. But also, the truth of impermanence means that anything is possible, that nothing is fixed. And so whatever our patterns are, our deep, deep conditioning of self-clinging, whatever that is, it's also impermanent. Suffering is impermanent. So we can learn to accept this waiting that she talks about, that we always kind of have this maybe unspoken expectation that something wonderful is going to happen. But when we can learn to accept this waiting, learn to open to the waiting with generosity and patience also, and receive the transforming power of that which is always with us and isn't waiting. You know, our life energy isn't waiting to express itself. So that's why we practice not to limit the free expression of it, because it's not waiting. It's not waiting to express its ocean of blessings, of great compassion. So this act of surrender, you know, we're surrendering our attachments to the separate self. And one way I've thought of it is, we start with surrendering our attachments, and then we surrender the concept of the one who's doing the surrendering, of being that separate one who surrenders. And then ultimately we surrender the surrendering itself. So we become a natural expression of Buddha's great compassion. So I wanted to stop with reading a couple of poems that are really pertinent to this chapter. One is from Rumi. It's called The Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. And the second poem is called Renunciation, by a woman I didn't know of until recently. Jennifer Wellwood, her husband, was a well-known author of psychology and spiritual books also. She says, "There will always be voices that promise you greatness and glory. They call out from the worldly marketplace. They call out from the spiritual marketplace. They call out from the fill your holes marketplace. They call out from the bigger, better, more marketplace. Do not buy their false promises or purchase their ephemeral wares. What fulfills for a moment is not worth the price of your soul. There are heights that will lift you, but not when you try to ascend them. There are powers that will fill you, but not when you make them your own. There are treasures and there are imitations of treasures. If you have lost your true gold, at least turn away from the glitter. Want only what is true. This will lead you to the well of your deepest sorrows. Follow that passageway all the way down. Become the dark emptiness of your absent core. Be still. Don't measure the waiting. Be still. Let the waiting become a fire. Be still. Let the fire show you its secret heart. A strand of clear light running through you. Gather yourself there, and the luminous universe opens. In that vast expanse, fathomless, infinite ocean of light, lose yourself and find yourself and become what you always already are. So, okay, let's have some discussion.
She can. Thank you very much. I don't think we were involved with Zen when they had the first Tassajara fire in 1977. But, the second one certainly was horrifying to hear about when it happened. But it's such a beautiful area there. I appreciated everything you said, but I especially liked your reminding us through Rumi's poem about the guest house that every day a different person shows up. And it reminded me that it's not only every day a different version of ourselves shows up, but every day a different version of the people we live with, the people we work with. So we can't really ever create a fixed concrete image of anyone because it's always changing. And it's important to just, for me anyway, to keep that reminder. Because, especially if you're working closely with someone or living together in a relationship, it sometimes gets really difficult. unless you remind yourself that, whatever is happening is just a flow through. It's difficult, but it's something that we can practice. Thank you.
So, thank you, Shikan, for your talk. It was very beautiful talk. And what came to me, it was that about the losing. And then you said that when I learn to lose, truly lose, then I will become truly alive. And because like for my mind, it's easier to accept the concept of impermanence, that everything is changing, but it's the same that every moment I'm losing this moment to be alive for another moment. But for my mind, it's still hard to lose things because I think something in me thinks that there is a possibility of being safe. There is a possibility that there will be a moment when I can not to keep losing, and there's this something in me believes still in that. So I resist when I lose. So there is, when the things, I'm losing things, they are changing, and I'm with them for a longer time, there's first thing in me is always like awe, resistance, moment of the resistance. Like I had the discussion with my friend yesterday, and about the war and the killing, and we have absolutely fundamental differences between me and him, and they are so deep that actually I know that this relationship doesn't make sense anymore. So without the conflict, I'm losing this friendship. So I'm letting go. Maybe the time will come, but this is constantly in my life that every day there's something and from time to time there's the resistance in me that I would like things to be fixed for a longer time, for like to have a feeling that something is safe. But I have so many addresses for the last 2-3 years. You guys would not ever even believe it. How many addresses I had. So like I'm moving constantly, and my life is changing. So the universe is giving me this lesson to keep losing and opening myself to the new experience. But yes, it's easier for the concept of impermanence. There's no difference between constantly losing, and impermanence. It's just a different name on the same thing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. What's your name?
Joanna.
Joanna. Hi, Joanna. Yeah, thank you for expressing that, because, one of the important elements of the practice is to learn to love our resistance, to bring the patience and the generosity to that resistance. And, we wouldn't be human if we didn't resist. That's what the teaching's all about, because we are human, and because we do expect to be able to not have to resist everything. But again, there's the presence, our Buddha nature, the presence of that which isn't waiting and is always offering this great compassion actively. We learn to open and receive it, and that's the source of the generosity and the patience that we can share with our resistance. And that's the transformative power, receiving the transformative power, the unconditional welcoming of the resistance. And we realize that it is something, as Rumi says, clearing us out for a new delight, the delight of freedom.
Shikan, thank you for your talk this evening. I specifically appreciate when you mention impermanence can also mean that anything is possible. Because certainly impermanence, when we deal with impermanence and loss, it can be challenging and trying, and we have our human experience with it. But impermanence, like you said, anything is possible. Only in impermanence do we find pure potentiality. Only in impermanence can we find this liberation possible. If you were born into an existence where you had the exact opposite, imagine the fundamental nature was the exact opposite. If everything was permanent, it would probably be a hellish experience, would be my conjecture. So now with that, saying that, you look at impermanence. Sometimes impermanence benefits us. Sometimes it does not. And it feels disadvantageous. So if impermanence could be good or bad, depending on how it impacts us, again, it just brings us back here. It brings us back home to how we're looking at things. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Last Sunday, there was a documentary on 60 Minutes, Earth Report, I guess, on the economy in Bhutan, and it's really interesting because it's a country that has been sort of somewhat isolated for some time, and they have, their values are so different than ours, and happiness is their motto, and everything, they have clean air, clean water, the mountains are sacred, they don't sacrifice any animals, for consumption. They ship them from India or whatever. Anyway, they have been just unique for so long, and but apparently their young people are leaving, and they're leaving. They're the main, they teach English in the schools, and they're all very well educated, and so they're living for opportunities and experiences elsewhere. So, it was painful to see that apparently they decided to make some changes, because otherwise they would lose all their young people, and there was no future for the country. And so they're creating these in the southern area, a city where they're gonna have like all these new opportunities for technology, and companies are going to be able to go there to open up. They're still going to be careful about that it's eco-friendly, and all these. I'm sure they're going to have high standards, but they're opening these up so that they can attract the young people to go back and stay, and not to lose them, unless it's a compromise. Otherwise, they would have stagnated, and it's sad to see, because it's so, such a pristine place, and they have such good values and all that, but at the same time, it's a wise compromise, I think, and so it's here, you see the contrast with, impermanence, letting go somehow of some of the old ways to make space for something new, Yeah, they're kind of like not going all the way, but a little bit, sort of halfway, So it's quite wise, and sad, but joyful at the same time, And it was nice to see that, and they have this, I think it's Danish architect that is designing all these beautiful things, colorful, sort of in congruent with their environment and their culture, and so.
So thank you for a great talk. It's really start making me think. But one thing came to my mind, yes, everything is temporary, not permanent. Yet there is something permanent, which is our consciousness. And if we can focus on that, realizing that this consciousness is the one which is aware of, realizing that nothing is permanent, that makes, and I'm trying to follow that stuff, that makes my attachment, I can let it go. Because I know there's something inside me is permanent, and I'm just passing through, right? So, but I have to keep reminding myself with each breath, right? And that's, to me, that seems to help while I'm focusing on that. But when you get into everyday thing, you forget, and then you lose it. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. What's your name?
PJ.
PJ? Okay.
PJ.
Thank you. Yeah, there is something permanent, but it's not perceivable or describable, so it doesn't really qualify as a thing in the normal sense of the word. But maybe, we have to try. The awareness of being present, or essential being, or just being itself, the source of all of our experience. And, I asked Reb Anderson once, what about death? And he goes, I was asking, I guess, what happens after death? And he said, well, whether there's rebirth or not, the momentum of the practice continues. And he thinks of life as practice. That's his life, is Zen practice. But you could also say just our aliveness, or the life force, continues, of which everything is an expression. Timeless, dimensionless being. And it does help to reflect. The world, as we know it, helps us to reflect on that which we can't comprehend, but which sustains us and supports us together with all beings.
We are coming to the end of our time together. Would anyone else like to offer an insight or comment? Carl, I see you bowing in.
Thank you for the talk, Shikin. I would just like to say that I read this chapter and your talk really resonated with me. I am persuaded that this is actually the essence of all true spirituality. All the dying to self would be the Christian equivalent, for example, which is actually a letting go of our attachment to all the notions of what we think of as ourself, that egoic self. And I think it's very, very well related in this chapter and in your talk. And it is, for me, the essence of practice, because in dying to the false self, the Buddha nature arises. And that Buddha nature is pure consciousness, which is truly the one unifying essence that we all are and that we all reflect. We're each just a different modulation of the pure consciousness. And in this experience, in the heat of the fire, impermanence truly is the gateway to the permanence of that Buddha self. And by letting go of the impermanent things through the process of the heat of that fire, however it expresses itself in our own experience, whether it's through the irritations or the various manifestations of the difficulties we encounter in our real life, each thing is pushing us not for what it is in itself, but for how we respond to it in terms of letting go and finding our true permanent Buddha nature.
Thank you. Beautiful, Carl.
We will continue our practice on Saturdays, so we have our service and setting meditation beginning at 8 o'clock. We will also be here next Wednesday at 6, regular time. We have the South Sea service. So if you would like to attend, get over to that, and please bring food to donate to the food pantry that we work with. Okay, so that will be next week, since that is the last Wednesday of the week.
Numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Illusions are inexhaustible. I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable.